So in order to make the Feeling Groovy quilt, we need some supplies. One of the things we need is the pattern. And this quilt is going to finish at 62 by 62 inches. We also need some scissors. We need a rotary cutter like this one by Quilter Select. I really like this one because it's nice and heavy and it fits in your hand really well. And you put the blade down by tapping like that, and then when you want to put the cover on it, you just tap it like that. That's a really nice rotary cutter. Then we also need some fabric. So this is the Evolution Brilliance line by QT Fabrics. And these fabrics are fabulous for that kind of feeling groovy thing. This one is Pink Toss. Then we have Yellow Flower, Pink Flower. And you'll notice that I have my fabrics labeled with the name of the fabric. That's really helpful because as you're going through the pattern, you want to pay particular attention and make sure that you have the correct fabrics that you're working with. This one is Orange Dots. Then we have Pink Diagonal, Orange Metal, Cream Strip or Stripe, Yellow Toss, Pink Pack, Orange Swirl, Pink Swirl, and you'll notice that all of these colors are in a warm palette. This same line of fabric comes in a cool palette, and you could make it with those cool colors as well. This is Yellow Pack, Yellow Beans, Pink Metal. Isn't that one fun? Orange Diagonal, Yellow Stripe, Cream Flower, Black Toss, Black Metal, and then we need some black or dark charcoal and some cream colored fabric. Now you also need a couple other things to make this quilt. You need some rulers. The one that you absolutely need to have is a straight edge ruler, like this one from Creative Grids. It's called the Quick Trim and Circle Ruler, and it is basically 12.5 by 3.5. And there's a lot of things that get cut at 3.5 inches, and so this is a really convenient ruler. I really like this one a lot, but you just need a straight edge ruler. Another one that would be good is this one from Olipa. It's the Olipa lip edge ruler, and it's called that because it has this lip edge right here, and that is great because it matches up. I'm going to move this so that you can see it. It matches up with the edge of your cutting mat. That's one other thing you need, is you do need a cutting mat. And then when you have it along this edge, you can line up the ruler with the lines of the mat. And because that edge is holding the ruler in place, it's going to stay in place. And when you're cutting, you want to make sure that you put, if you're left-handed, you'd want to have your right hand over here, and you want part of your fingers to be on the edge or off of the ruler so that you can kind of hold that ruler in place as you're sliding along with the rotary cutter on the other side. Now there are a couple of specialty rulers that I'm going to show you that are not required to make this, but I do think that they're awfully helpful and make this quilt, making this quilt a lot easier. And one of those is the Stripology squared ruler. And this is fantastic because it has these little notes at the bottom where the stars are basically 1.5 inch cuts. So every star is a 1.5 inch cut. and the squares are 2.5 inch cuts. So you take and lay it flat on your mat and get the lines lined up, like you could actually line up the lines on this with the lines of the mat. And then there are notches in here, and so when your fabric is underneath there, you take and have your rotary cutter blade exposed, and you put it in these keyholes. See how there's a little keyhole here? You put it in that keyhole and then just run it like that, and it makes perfectly straight cuts, and you're able to make multiple cuts. So when I need like 1.5 inch strips or 2.5 inch strips, this is a really fast way of making them. And then one other ruler that will really make your life easy for making this quilt is the split rectangles ruler. This is Deb Tucker's Split Rex, and it makes split rectangles in so many different sizes, from, I need to put white underneath here to see this, from a 1/2 inch to a 1 inch finished, a 1 inch by 2 inch finished, a 1.5 by 3 inch finished, a 2 by 4 finished, 2.5 by 5, 3 by 6, 3.5 by 7, and 4 by 8. There are rotary cutting instructions in the pattern for how to make these split rectangles, but trust me, your life will be so much easier if you use this Deb Tucker split rectangle ruler. This is one of those Studio 180 rulers, and I will be doing a demonstration of how to use this ruler. And then one other thing I think you need is you need some pins, because there's going to be times when you want to pin those fabrics together when you're sewing, and also for pinning the intersections so that you get those nice sharp points when you're sewing intersections together. So those are basically the supplies you need. And the next thing I will be showing you is how to cut some fabric with the Stripology ruler, and also with the Deb Tucker Splits rectangle ruler. So from this cream flower fabric, I need some 1.5 inch squares. The easiest way for me to get those is with the Creative Grid Stripology ruler. So I've taken the 1/2 yard of fabric, and I've folded the crease or the fold at the bottom up to the selvage, and I'm lining up this new fold line with a line on the mat. Then I need 1.5 inch strips, so those are the stars. So I'm going to make my first cut where there's a star. So I'm going to take and line up this line where the star is with the line on the mat, and then you want to make sure that your keyholes are below the fabric. And I'm going to take and line up this black line right here. And then I also want to make sure that the lines are lined up here at the top. You can't see this, but there's lines at the top of the ruler as well. So I've got it all lined up. I'm now going to take my rotary cutter and put it in the keyhole, and you'll see me as I move over here. And I'm just going to slice along like that. So then this next star is going to be 1.5 inches. So I move over to the next star, and that's going to be my first strip. Then I want another one, so I'm going to move over, and that'll be my second one. And this will be my third one. And this will be my fourth one. Now I also need some 3-inch strips from this fabric that we're going to use to cut the split rectangles with the split rectangle ruler. So I'm going to go over from where I last cut, which is this 6-inch mark right here, and I'm going to go over 3 inches. So that'd be 1, 2, 3. And I'm going to make a cut right here at the 3. And then I'm going to go over to the 1. Let's see. So the 2 would be 1, 2, 3. I'm going to go to the 0, and that would be another 3 inch. So that's going to give me the 1, 2, 3, 4, 1.5 inch strips, and it's giving me 2 3 inches, and I'm going to need one more of those. So I'm going to move this over and again put it on a line. And we want the star. So first of all, I'm going to make sure that this is lined up with these lines so I know it's nice and straight. And then the star is what gives us the 1.5. So I'm going to take and put this star right here. And you can kind of see in these keyholes, if the line is going right in the center of them, then you have it lined up correctly. And so I'm going to make this first cut where the star is. That'll trim up that edge. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. I needed one more 3-inch cut. So I made it where the star is, so to the next star would be 1.5, and to this would be 3. So a couple of different ways we can do that. So one is to go 1, 2, 3. So yep, the next star is going to be 3. And I'll make a cut right there, and that is the other 3-inch strip that I need. So now I have my 3-inch strips right here. This is leftover. And here are my 1.5-inch ones, which I'm now going to subcut into 1.5-inch squares. So I'm going to lay these along here like this. Get them all nice and lined up straight. And then I'm going to take and place the Stripology ruler, and I want this star to be right on the edge here. So this black line is where that is. I'm going to put the star right there and get everything nice and lined up. And it's going to give me, so I'm going to cut down this first star, so that's going to give me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's going to give me 7 squares from each one. So now that I've got it all lined up, I'm going to start with this first line, go to the second star, the next star, the next star, the next one. And this is so easy because it's marked for you right where you have to cut. You don't even have to think about it. And then this last one, and look at, there's just a tiny little bit of waste there. So we get rid of this waste, get rid of this waste over here, and look how many squares I just very quickly cut out. That's how easy it is. So the Stripology ruler, this one's called Stripology Squared Ruler, and it basically goes from 0 to 12.5, and on this end it goes from 0 to 12.5. So it's a great ruler for cutting out 1.5 and 2.5-inch strips, or any other strips, and then subcutting into squares or rectangles or whatever you need. So I highly recommend this ruler. Next up, I'll be showing you how to cut the pieces for the split rectangles. Now, to make the split rectangles with a split rectangle ruler, first of all, you need to cut strips. And so the unit that we're making is actually going to be 1 inch by 2 inch. So it tells right here on this angled end what size strips we need to cut. So for a 1 by 2 finished unit, we need to cut strips at 3 inches. And that's what I've done, is cut strips at 3 inches. Now there are 2 different angles that can be created when you're making this. One can go this direction and one can go this direction. And the one that we're making needs to go this direction. So the instructions say, and I'm left-handed, so for left-handed cutting, all the strips need to be right side up. And I should place them vertical on the cutting mat. So I've got my 2 segments of a 3-inch strip here, and I'm going to place them both right sides up. So they're both right sides up, and then we've got to get them perfectly lined up here. And then we're just going to line them up vertically on our cutting mat. And we're going to make sure that they're lined up perfectly down here at the bottom. Okay. Then our first cut is made with the angle this direction. So we're going to be looking at this black line right here, which we're going to put on the edge of our fabric. And then we're looking for the 1 by 2 inch line there. So we're going to put that down here like this. The big black solid line is on the bottom, and that 1 by 2 inch line is on the right hand side. And when we get that in place, we just come along and cut that off. And so that's our first one. Then we're going to take and rotate the ruler. It was this way. We're going to rotate it 180 degrees. And now we're going to look for right there it says the second trim. And we're going to put that right on the right edge. And we're going to take this diagonal line and line it up with the diagonal line that we just cut. And we're going to go a straight cut like that. Then we're going to take the ruler again and rotate it 180 degrees. And this time there is no trim line over here. It lines up right with the edge of that fabric. And the 1 by 2 finished line is over on the right hand side. And the solid black line says place on the cut edge of the strip. So that's what I'm doing. I'm placing that on the cut edge of the strip. And cut along there like that. And I'm making pairs as I do this. So I'm getting 2 each time I do it. Then I'm going to rotate the ruler again 180 degrees. Line up this second trim line with the right edge of the fabric. And this diagonal line, which says it's the second trim guide line, we line that up with that cut line. And the trim line over here, second trim line with the right edge of the fabric, and make this straight cut. And you just go back and forth like that until you get the number of pieces that you need. And then I'll show you, once I've sewn some of the pieces together, how you trim up the pieces once they've been sewn and pressed. So the other piece that's going to go with this is these pink pieces. And so you can see that as I line this piece up like that and this piece like that, it's forming that shape right there. So that's how I knew. Now if we needed both of these shapes, we would be putting part of the fabric right side up and part of it right side down. But because we need all this shape, we're putting all of the fabric right side up. So now we have our pieces cut, and basically you'll notice that they have the same angle. So they go like this, and then in order to sew them, you place one on top of the other, and then see how there's that little point sticking out there? That's what you want to have happen, is have like a little point sticking out. See, there's one sticking out there too. So you want a little point sticking out on both ends. And then you sew it at a 1/4 inch, and you want to get as nice and perfect of a 1/4 inch as you possibly can. So you just sew it like that, and then with the dark side on the top, you want to press the seam flat first, and then with your fingers, press it open like this, and then take and press right along that seam. And when you've got it pressed open, this is what it looks like. And so now we're going to take and trim these up with the split rectangle ruler. So again, we have to look for the 1 by 2 inch finish line, which is right there. And also this other diagonal line is going to come in handy. So here is the 2.5 inch line, and here is the 1.5 inch line. And so we want to make, since this is going to be a 1 by 2 unit, the unfinished unit is 1.5 by 2.5. So we want to make sure that both of those lines are still within the fabric before we start trimming. So then this diagonal line right here, and it is called the common diagonal seam line. We're going to put that right along that seam right there. And again, making sure that our 2.5 and our 1.5 are contained within the fabric for this first cut. So that looks pretty good. And now we trim up this side and then trim over here on this side. Okay. You notice how it leaves like a little point there. That's important because that will be taken up by your 1/4 inch when you sew these pieces to another piece. So now we rotate the piece 180 degrees and we put that same line on there, the diagonal seam line, but now we're going to take the 2.5 and the 1.5 and we're going to put them on those edges that we cut, and then still have this diagonal line go right in that seam. So you can see I have the 1.5 inch line over here, I have the 2.5 inch line down here on the bottom, and the center diagonal line lined up with the seam. And again, we're going to cut these two and cut along here. It's kind of awkward for me because the tripod's in the way for me to cut this. And so you notice how there's another little piece sticking there. It's not a perfect, the diagonal doesn't end perfectly in the corner, and that's exactly how you want it. So I'll do one more of these. So again, we put it here. We're putting this diagonal seam line here. We want to make sure that our 2.5 and our 1.5 are contained within the fabric, and we want that diagonal seam line lined right up, right where that diagonal seam is. And then we're going to trim on this side and trim on this side. Okay, then we rotate it 180 degrees. And again, the diagonal seam line is in the middle there, right on that seam. And now we want to have the 2.5 on the bottom and the 1.5 over on the right-hand side, right like this. And then we're going to trim up these other two sides. So you trim them up right like that. And they're all going to end up looking like that. And next I'll show you how the block goes together. This is it's a cornerstone unit, which is typically the squares that are in between sashing units, but this one happens to be a pieced cornerstone unit. So I will be back and show you how we put those units together. So this is how you lay those cornerstone units out. You need a pink 2.5 inch square, which I've previously cut. Then we have these smaller white cream squares, and they go in the corners. And then those half rectangle units that we just made go around the outside of the square. So you would take and flip this one over onto that to sew it. And it's easiest to sew if you put like the piece that's perfectly flat on the bottom. So you would just line that up and sew it 1/4 inch. Do that on both sides, and then you're going to press both of these towards the white. Then same thing with this one. When you flip it over, you're going to sew with the square on the bottom because that'll be the easiest way to sew this. And you're going to press these towards that center square. Then on this row, same thing, you're going to press towards the cream pieces. And then when you sew these, this is row 1, row 2, row 3. When you sew row 1 and row 3 to row 2, you're going to press towards that center square again. So this is what it looks like when it's all sewn together. Cute little cornerstone unit, and it should look just as neat on the back when you've sewn it. Now you can learn from me on a couple mistakes. If you notice in the pattern here, the little points of the star are actually going to the left, and my little points are going to the right. And the reason that happened is because the angle that we were using on that half rectangle ruler was the other direction. And so you have to pay careful attention to that. So I should have actually had the pieces wrong side up when I was cutting, and then it would have given me this angle. But it doesn't matter, because now all it means is that on these little units, instead of the peaks of the star going to the left, they're going to go to the right. So I really don't think it will matter. So that's one lesson you can learn from me. And then another one will be to label, as I indicated previously, your fabrics, and then pay real close attention to the pattern, to what fabric they're talking about. There is a solid cream fabric that's involved in this particular pattern, and I had cut out all of these half rectangle pieces and the squares in that cream fabric, and then realized it needed to be this cream flower fabric. So there's a couple things you can learn from the mistakes I've made. So next we'll be working on those sashing units that will connect to these cornerstone units. So to make the sashing strips, which are the strips of fabric that go in between the blocks in the quilt, and this one happens to be pieced sashing units with pieced cornerstones, and again the cornerstones are the squares that go in between the sashing pieces and in the corners of the blocks. So to make these pieced sashing units, we need a strip of cream fabric and a strip of the black fabric, and then basically you're going to sew this down one side like that, and then you're going to take the other one, and from the opposite end you're going to sew that one like that. Then when they've been sewn, it's going to look like this. So you're sewing 1/4 inch from the edge. You're going to want to press half of them so that they're pressed towards the dark. Then you're going to want to take the other half and press them so that it's towards the white, and I'll show you why. So these sashing units are going to meet up with the cornerstone, and this is the cornerstone. And so if you look at how this one's been pressed, it's pressed inward. So in order to get these seams to match, we want to have one sashing unit that's pressed outward that way, and another one that's pressed outward this way. And then what happens is when we put these two together, you'll see that these seams will then nest with each other like that, and it's going to make it lay nice and flat. And so the same thing will happen on the other side. But now these are going to the outside, so that means that these other sashing units need to be pressed to the inside. So these go here and down here. And if we take and put this like this, you will see that these seams also nest with each other. So that's why you want to press 50% of these sashing units towards the black or towards the outside, and 50% towards the cream or towards the inside. So there's another tool that I'm going to use that makes life so much easier, and it's my Go Big Cutter and the Go Qube 8-inch block and the Go Qube companion set corners. You still can make this quilt with the rotary cutter, but cutting the pieces out with Accuquilt makes it just so much easier to sew the pieces together. So the pattern calls for 2.5-inch unfinished half square triangles, and it also tells you what size to cut out what are called rough cuts. And what rough cuts do is they fit over the die. So this is the 2.5-inch unfinished half square triangle. So you take and you place the fabrics over the die like that, and you can place up to 6 layers at a time. Then we take and place a mat over the die, and what's happening is there are steel blades down inside this die that, as the die runs through the machine, there's a roller in this machine right here, and the roller is going to press down on the mat and it's going to cut the fabric on the dies. And you want to make sure that you're running it through with the label next to your belly. My belly is over here on this side of the die, so I'm running this through. When it comes out, there's static electricity on it, so you want to give it a little bit of love and slide that off. Peel the extra away. And then we have all these wonderful half square triangles. So I'll do that for you one more time. You take and lay these pieces over the die. Put the mat on, run it through the machine. Give it a little love. And we have all these perfect 2.5-inch unfinished half square triangles. So I was able to get all of these half square triangles cut out very quickly. Aren't they just the cutest little things? And they sew together so easily. Now these aren't the pieces that actually sew together, but I'll show you. When you put them together like this, they line up perfectly so that you know exactly where to line them up. And you basically sew from that point to that point, which is a perfect 1/4 inch. So it makes the sewing so much easier as well. Now we also need another shape that's called the bow tie shape for this quilt. And I'm going to cut that out with Accuquilt as well because it's going to be so much easier. Now on this particular die, you can see that we're going to get 4 shapes at one time. So the size of the rough cut that was needed for this die was 5.5 inches. So again, I can put 6 of these on here at one time. I'm going to put on the mat and run them through. Give it a little bit of love and slide the mat off. Pull this around. And look at these beautiful butterfly shapes. So awesome. So easy to cut out with Accuquilt. So now the block is all laid out and the pieces have all been cut. So here's how it's laid out. In the corners, we have these bow tie pieces with these tiny little half square triangles, and they get sewn on like that. And then next to them in the middle, we have half square triangle pieces in the brightly colored fabric with black, and they get pieced together like this. Underneath here, I have one that's been partially sewn. In the center, we have 4 bow tie pieces with the little half square triangles. So here's another one that's been partially sewn. So when you sew these pieces, they just go perfectly together like that. Notice how the dog ears are already cut off. You sew it 1/4 inch and get that nice little corner unit. These center units, when they're sewn together, you want to press them in opposite directions. So this one is pressed to the left, this one is pressed to the right. So when I join these two together, you can see that those seams are going to butt up against each other. And also, these seams butt up as well. The bow tie and the half square triangles will also butt up with each other. So those line up perfectly to sew together. And then when you sew these half square triangles, again, you want it to be the opposite. So this one was pressed to the left. So we're going to press this one to the right. And this is pressed to the right. So we're going to press this one to the left. And in order to get these units to join together, 50% of them, like these two, are pressed to the bow tie piece, and these two are pressed to the black half square triangle, and that's what allows these pieces to nest with each other. And then these outside corners are pressed towards the black half square triangle. So when the block is all sewn together, this is what it looks like. And you can see it really sews up pretty nicely. There's not a whole lot of trimming that needs to be done. And that's what's really nice about cutting out the pieces with Accuquilt. If you cut correctly and sew correctly, there's not a whole lot of trimming that needs to be done. And then when we've pressed things in the proper places, everything lays pretty flat on the back. And there's a lot of intersections coming together when you sew these outside edges on. And so I actually pressed those last seams open, which will allow the block to lie flatter. So that is the block in the Feeling Groovy quilt. And now I'm going to sew the rest of the blocks together, and then I'll show you how we add the sashing. Are you feeling groovy? Here's the Feeling Groovy quilt top all put together. And you can see I have all of the blocks that kind of look like powerful groovy flowers. And then there's sashing in between. So there's sashing pieces in between each block, and then there are rows of sashing in between the rows on the quilt. So this is the Feeling Groovy quilt, and the pattern's available on my website at www.bluebearquilts.com. And the fabric line that was used to make this quilt is QT Fabrics Brilliance line. And there also is one other quilt that I designed with that fabric line, and it's called Scarborough Fair. And I've done some videos on that quilt as well. So this is a real groovy 70s type of quilt and fabric, and I hope you've enjoyed this video on how to make the Feeling Groovy quilt, and we'll see you next time